1859, Denmark, the family that only gave birth to identical boys, the Holstebro case. The year was 1859. A thick gray mist hung over the quiet Danish town of Holstebro. The cobblestone streets glistened with morning dew, the sound of church bells echoing across empty squares. To an outsider, it seemed peaceful. But for those who lived there, a sense of unease was growing, whispers that would one day become legend. Holstebro was not a place where secrets stayed buried. With only a few hundred souls, every cough, every quarrel, every birth was noticed. The townspeople shared their bread, their gossip, and their fears in equal measure. And in 1859, one family would give them plenty to whisper about. At the heart of this story was a small farmhouse on the edge of town. Its windows faced the river, its walls thick with the smell of smoke and damp straw. Inside lived the Jensen family, ordinary by all appearances, until the children began to arrive. The first child was born in winter, a boy. The second came in spring, another boy. By the time the third son arrived, identical in face and form to his brothers, people in Holstebro began to look sideways at the family. Have you noticed? They murmured in the marketplace. They all looked the same. The midwives, hardened women who had delivered dozens of babies, swore they had never seen anything like it. Each boy could have been mistaken for the other. Same pale hair, same glass blue eyes, same fragile cries that pierced the farmhouse walls in the dead of night. The town's church bells tolled louder with each birth. Whispers spread through the fog-draped streets. Some called it a miracle. Others muttered about curses. In Denmark, the 19th century was still heavy with superstition, and when nature behaved in ways no one could explain, fear crept in like frost through the cracks. By the fourth identical son, the word unnatural floated on the wind. Farmers would cross themselves when passing the Jensen farm. Mothers pulled their children closer when the boys walked through town. People did not like what they could not understand. Yet, not all saw it as dark. To some, the boys were a fascination, a living puzzle that stirred the imagination. The local physician, an aging man with trembling hands, wrote detailed notes after each delivery. He described their features, measured their limbs, even compared their cries. But science offered no answers, only more questions. Still, the story spread. It left Holstebro and drifted to nearby villages. Travelers told it in hushed tones at roadside inns. Have you heard of the family in Denmark, they said, that only gives birth to identical boys? But the heart of the mystery was not in the science. It was in the silence. Neighbors claimed they heard the father pacing outside at night, his boots crunching against the frozen soil, his muttered words carried by the wind. The mother rarely left the farmhouse. She was seen only at the church, her veil drawn low, her shoulders hunched as if the weight of her sons pressed down on her back. The fog seemed thicker around their home. People swore they saw shadows move in the windows, though no lanterns burned inside. And as the years passed, the question grew heavier, darker, impossible to ignore. How many identical boys would this family bring into the world? It began as an oddity. Then it became an obsession. By 1862, the Jensen family had already welcomed more than half a dozen sons, each one a mirror of the last. To see them lined up was unsettling, like a row of living dolls, stamped from the same mold. Their pale faces, thin lips, and sky-colored eyes seemed carved by repetition. Even their laughter carried the same high pitch, echoing through the fog like an eerie chorus. To outsiders, it was fascinating. But for Holstebro, it was frightening. The neighbors tried to pretend at first. They congratulated the parents with forced smiles, left baskets of bread at the door, and whispered prayers under their breath. But inside their homes, doors bolted tight, they spoke freely. "This is not natural," one woman hissed over her cooking fire. "No family bears only boys. And not identical ones," her husband added, his voice low. It became a story told in taverns, half jest, half warning. Travelers laughed at first, but when they walked past the farmhouse, saw the boys' identical heads pressed against the window glass, the laughter died. The mother, Anna Jensen, became the subject of endless rumor. Some said she had made a bargain with God. Others whispered it was the devil. She kept to herself, her body weakening with each birth, yet her silence was sharper than any denial. Her only words were heard in prayer, murmurs that carried through the church, fragile and desperate. The father, Henrik, was a man of stone, stoic, tall, his face weathered by work in the fields. He rarely smiled, even less so now. Townsfolk swore his eyes had grown darker with each child, as though he was carrying knowledge he dared not share. Some claimed he avoided their gazes on purpose, unwilling to answer the questions that lingered on every tongue. The boys themselves grew like shadows, always together, rarely apart. They dressed alike, played alike, and even their illnesses struck in unison. If one coughed, the others followed within the hour. If one scraped his knee, the others seemed to limp in sympathy. Children in town avoided them, not because the boys were cruel, but because they were too alike. In the games of hide and seek, one could never tell which brother had been caught. In the fields, their laughter seemed to come from every direction at once. For a child imagination, it was too much. One girl swore she saw two of the boys standing perfectly still in a field one night, staring at the moon. When she blinked, there were four. By now, whispers of the family spread beyond Holstebro. Scholars wrote curious letters, requesting to study the Holstebro boys. Priests in nearby parishes warned of sin and divine punishment. The Jensens, however, refused all visitors. The farmhouse became a fortress of secrecy. Shutters closed, curtains drawn, the mother's face pale at the window, the father's figure guarding the fields. And the boys, always seen together, always the same, like the reflection of one boy split into many. But it was not only the town that felt uneasy. Inside the Jensen household, tension thickened like the fog outside. Anna's health was fading, her frame growing thin, her hands trembling as she tried to care for her endless line of sons. And Henrik, though silent, carried a heaviness in his gaze that spoke of fear he dared not voice. Because behind the mystery of the Holstebro boys was another question, one that gnawed at the edges of every mind in town. How long could a family live with such a secret before something broke? It began on a bitter night in December 1859. Snow drifted across the rooftops of Holstebro. The church bell struck midnight as the first Jensen child entered the world. His cry pierced the silence, strong and clear. The midwife smiled, wiping her brow. "A healthy boy," she announced. For Henrik and Anna Jensen, it was joy. After years of waiting, they had been blessed. The boy's name was Niels. He had soft blonde hair, pale skin, and piercing blue eyes, the very image of his father as a child. To Anna, he was perfect. To Henrik, he was proof of a future, a legacy. No one knew then what this birth would begin. When Niels was brought to church for baptism, townsfolk gathered close. The priest dipped his hand into the cold water, marked the sign of the cross, and murmured the sacred words. It was an ordinary ritual. Nothing seemed out of place. But whispers began almost immediately. It wasn't the child himself, it was Anna. Her silence unsettled people. She hardly looked at her neighbors. She clutched Niels close, her eyes fixed on the floor. It was as though she feared he would be taken from her. "She acts different," someone whispered outside the church, as if she knows something. A year later, Anna was pregnant again. Another winter, another long night of labor. This time the cries came quicker, sharper. And when the midwife placed the baby in Anna's arms, the air in the room seemed to turn cold. The child was identical. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the same narrow nose, the same thin lips. A perfect copy of Niels. The midwife frowned. She had seen siblings resemble one another, but this was different. "He looks exactly like the first," she whispered, unsettled. Henrik said nothing. His jaw tightened, his eyes avoiding the women in the room. The town took notice. At first, they joked, "The Jensens are making twins 1 year at a time." But beneath the laughter, unease grew. People crossed themselves when they saw the two boys together. Their matching faces seemed less like coincidence, more like something unnatural. By the third birth, there was no more laughter. Another identical boy, another pale face another echo of the same child. Neighbors began keeping their distance. Mothers pulled their children away when the Jensen boys approached. The midwife, now trembling, refused to speak of what she had seen. For Anna, joy had turned to dread. Each time she felt the quickening in her womb, her prayers grew desperate. She feared what would come, yet her body betrayed her again and again. Her nights were long. She sat by the window, candle flickering, holding one boy after another, unable to tell them apart except by name. Her mind grew heavy with questions she dared not ask aloud. Why were her sons the same? Why did God keep repeating them? By the fourth birth, silence replaced celebration. The neighbors did not come. The priest baptized without words of warmth. And Henrik, once a proud father, now stared at his sons as though they were strangers. The joy of that first December night was gone. All that remained was fear, spreading like frost through every corner of Holstebro. And as the family story deepened, a chilling thought settled in the minds of the townspeople. What if these boys were not meant to be born at all? By the time the fifth son was born, Holstebro no longer celebrated. The births had become a spectacle, one the town watched with dread. Each year brought another identical boy, another face that mirrored the last, another silent baptism where whispers drowned out hymns. The pattern was undeniable. No dotes, no differences, just the same boy, replicated again and again, as if the Jensens had been cursed to live inside a mirror. The town's gossip grew louder. In taverns, men leaned close over mugs of beer. It isn't right, one muttered. No family has this many sons. All the same, another agreed. Some swore it was witchcraft. Others whispered it was punishment from God. A few even claimed Henrik Jensen had angered someone powerful, an old debt, an unspoken sin, that doomed his children to be born as copies. The laughter was gone. In its place, suspicion. Children, ever honest in their fear, avoided the Jensen boys. In the marketplace, when they appeared, games fell silent. One child whispered to another, "It's like they're all ghosts of the same boy." The mothers of Holstebro clutched their daughters tighter, whispering warnings. Do not play near their farm. Do not follow them. The boys themselves seemed unaware. They played in the fields, their laughter sharp in the fog, their footsteps echoing like one multiplied by many. But to outsiders, their sameness was unsettling, impossible to ignore. The priest grew uneasy too. By the sixth baptism, his hands trembled as he poured the holy water. He lingered in prayer longer than before, his voice thick, as if he feared the ritual was failing. Behind closed doors, he confided to the bishop in Viborg. "This is no ordinary family," he wrote in a letter. "Each child is the same as the last. It is as though time repeats itself in their house." No answer came. Perhaps the bishop did not wish to touch the matter, or perhaps he knew silence was safer. The Jensens, once welcome neighbors, became outsiders in their own town. People crossed the street to avoid them. Farmers refused to share tools or trade livestock. Even in church, pews emptied near where Anna and Henrik sat, their row of identical boys pressed tightly together. Anna carried shame in her eyes. She walked hunched, veiled, her body fragile from endless pregnancies. Some claimed they heard her weeping in the night, her cries carried across the frozen fields. Henrik, in contrast, grew harder. He worked the land with a quiet fury, his shoulders stooped but unbroken. He spoke little, even to his neighbors. Some swore he avoided their eyes, as though he carried knowledge he dared not reveal. By now, the family's farmhouse had taken on a life of its own. Shutters drawn, curtains never open, the sound of many identical voices spilling into the yard. Travelers passed through Holstebro and left with the same tale. "There's a family here," they said, "who only gives birth to the same boy." Again and again, the story spread far beyond the town. Scholars scoffed, priests warned, and superstitious folk shuddered. But those who walked past the farmhouse at dusk, who heard the boys singing the same hymn in unison, swore the tale was no mere exaggeration. And so the pattern continued, relentless, unstoppable. With each birth, the town's whispers grew darker. And behind those whispers lay a question no one dared say aloud. What would happen if the pattern never ended? By the seventh son, Holstebro could no longer keep the secret. Word traveled far beyond Denmark's western coast. Scholars and physicians, intrigued and unsettled, came knocking on the Jensens' door. The family, once shunned, now became a subject of study. The first to arrive was a physician from Aarhus, Dr. Felix. He was a tall man with a trimmed beard and the confidence of modern science. He rode into town on horseback, carrying leather bags filled with instruments, calipers, glass vials, notebooks bound in black. When he entered the farmhouse, the air was heavy. Anna sat in the corner, frail and pale, clutching her newborn. The child's cry was weak but familiar, eerily familiar. Holm froze as he looked down at the infant. It was the same boy. Again, the doctor's hands trembled. He examined the child carefully, eyes, jawline, hands, feet. Every detail matched the other son's, as though he were studying a duplicate. Holm recorded his findings in detail, yet none of his notes explained what he had seen. Soon after, more doctors came, some from Copenhagen, others from Germany. They gathered in the farmhouse, their tools clinking, their questions endless. They studied the boys side by side, lining them up like specimens. One physician measured their skulls, another examined their teeth, a third pricked their fingers to compare their blood. Each test ended with the same conclusion. The boys were identical, down to the smallest detail. The doctors whispered among themselves. It cannot be natural. Perhaps they are twins, born years apart. Impossible. Science had no answer. Outside the farmhouse, the town watched uneasily. Men of medicine, once revered, looked powerless. Their instruments clattered. Their voices grew strained. The longer they stayed, the more unsettled they became. Some left in frustration. Others lingered, unable to let go of the mystery. One German doctor was overheard in the tavern, his voice low and shaken. These children, they are not brothers. They are copies. Perfect copies. The attention only made things worse for the Jensens. Curious onlookers traveled miles to see the Holstebro boys. Some hoped for answers, others came only to gawk. The Jensens' home became a place of both fascination and fear. Anna shrank further into herself. She refused to speak with the doctors, refused to meet their eyes. Henrik, meanwhile, grew hostile. He chased visitors from his land, his voice rising in fury. "Leave us," he shouted one winter morning, his breath clouding in the cold air. "You will not turn my family into a circus." But the harder he pushed the world away, the more it pressed in. The doctor's reports spread across Denmark, then into Europe. Articles were written in medical journals, though most dismissed the case as exaggeration. Those who believed, however, described it as one of the strangest mysteries of the century. Still, no cure, no explanation, only questions that deepened with each birth. For the people of Holstebro, science had failed. The doctors had come with books and tools, yet they left with nothing but fear in their eyes. If men of reason could not explain the Holstebro boys, then perhaps the old whispers were true. Perhaps it was not science at all. Perhaps it was a curse. When science failed, the whispers grew darker. Holstebro had always been a town rooted in old beliefs. Behind its church hymns and farmers' prayers lingered stories of spirits, curses, and sins passed down through bloodlines. And now, with every identical son born in the Jensen farmhouse, those stories stirred to life. It began with the old women at the marketplace. Bent with age, scarves wrapped tight around their heads. They muttered that Anna Jensen must have angered someone. Perhaps a midwife, perhaps a neighbor, perhaps even God himself. Others pointed their suspicion toward Henrik. He was too silent, too brooding. Some swore he had dabbled in things no Christian man should touch. At the tavern, when ale loosened tongues, one farmer claimed Henrik had once been seen at the river at midnight, tossing something wrapped in cloth into the water. No one could prove it, but the image stuck. The rumor spread like frost. The family was cursed. Children whispered it at school. "Don't look them in the eyes," one said. "If you do, You'll have dreams of the same face, over and over. Mothers drew chalk symbols on their doors to keep the boys away. Men refused to shake Henrik's hand at market, fearing the curse would cling to their skin. Even the priest grew fearful. His sermons became harsher, filled with fire and warnings. God punishes sin, he thundered from the pulpit. Though he never named the Jensens, the townspeople knew where his eyes wandered. The farmhouse itself began to look haunted. Neighbors swore they saw candlelight flickering at odd hours, as though prayers or rituals were taking place. Others claimed they heard the boys chanting together in the fields, songs that sounded like hymns but stretched too long, too hollow, like echoes of something not meant for human ears. One farmer's wife, walking home at dusk, froze when she saw 6 of the boys standing in the yard. Their faces turned toward her, perfectly still, their eyes reflecting the last of the daylight. She dropped her basket of bread and fled. When her husband went back the next morning to retrieve it, the bread was gone. Superstition thickened the air of Holstebro. Ordinary sounds, the creak of a gate, the hoot of an owl, took on sinister meaning. Whenever the boys passed through town, shutters closed. When their footsteps echoed down the cobblestones, the silence afterward felt unbearable. By now, no one spoke of the Jensens as a family. There was something else, something not quite human. A reminder that beneath every church hymn, every scientific explanation, fear still ruled the human heart. But the whispers hid something else too. A secret fear not spoken aloud. What if the curse was not just upon the Jensens? What if by living so close, the whole town was trapped in it? Henrik Jensen was a man carved from stone. He rose before dawn, worked the fields until his hands bled, and spoke little even to his neighbors. In Holstebro, silence was often mistaken for strength. But as the years passed and the identical boys multiplied, that silence began to feel like something else. Knowledge kept hidden. The town whispered about Anna's sorrow, her frailty, her endless burden. But it was Henrik who drew the darkest suspicions. He never smiled at his sons. He never lifted them onto his shoulders as other fathers did. Instead, he watched them with a distance that unsettled even the boldest farmers. Some claimed he avoided looking at them altogether, as though their faces reflected something he could not bear. Others swore he lingered too long, staring with an expression no one could read. Pride, fear or guilt? Late at night, neighbors claimed they heard him pacing the farmhouse yard. Boots crunching in the frost, the steady rhythm of a man lost in thought, or perhaps prayer. Some said he spoke aloud to no one. Others swore they heard him arguing with a voice that never answered. Once, a shepherd passing by claimed he saw Henrik kneeling in the field, his hands buried in the soil, his body shaking. He was weeping, the shepherd whispered later, like a man begging forgiveness. But what sin required such sorrow? The silence grew heavier each time a new son was born. When the midwives brought in the news, another boy, the same as the last, Henrik simply nodded. No joy, no surprise, no words of wonder. It was as if he expected it. This, more than anything, unsettled Holstebro. A father should rejoice, should despair, should react. But Henrik did neither. He carried each birth like a burden already known. Whispers followed him wherever he went. In the tavern, men lowered their voices when he entered. Some believed he had made a pact, that the sameness of his sons was the price of something he had gained long ago. Others believed he had wronged someone, a woman perhaps, who cursed his bloodline to endless repetition. But Henrik never defended himself, never denied, never explained, and in his silence, suspicion only grew. Anna, weakened by childbirth after childbirth, sometimes looked at her husband with eyes that held more questions than love. Did she know? Did he? In her exhaustion, did she ever ask him why? No one could say. The farmhouse walls kept their secrets, but the town believed Henrik knew something, something he refused to share, something that tied him to the endless line of identical boys. And as his silence deepened, so too did the fear. Because in Holstebro, when a man held his tongue against endless questions, it was not strength people saw. It was guilt. Anna Jensen was once described as beautiful, Before the births began, she was known for her soft smile, her pale hair pinned neatly beneath her bonnet, her quiet grace at church. But by the time her 8th son was born, she was a shadow of herself. Her skin had grown pale, almost translucent, her frame thin, her shoulders hunched. Each birth stole something from her, leaving her weaker, more fragile, as though the life was being drained from her piece by piece. The women of Holstebro pitied her, though they dared not say it aloud. They saw how she trembled carrying baskets to the market, how she clutched the church pew with shaking hands, her row of identical boys pressed close to her skirts, how she avoided their gazes, as though shame lived inside her bones. Some whispered she was cursed. Others said she was a victim. But all agreed on one thing: no mother should be made to carry such a burden. Inside the farmhouse, and as nights were long, candles burned low as she sat by the cradle, her eyes darting between faces she could not tell apart. Each boy cried with the same voice. Each stirred with the same restless movements. She began to call them by the wrong names, her exhaustion blurring their identities into one. Once, a neighbor girl sent to bring milk to the family claimed she saw Anna staring at one of the babies with tears streaming down her face. She whispered, "Which one are you?" The girl later told her mother. The words spread quickly. Her body bore the marks of sacrifice. Endless childbirth had left her frail, her health deteriorating. Her cheeks hollowed, her eyes rimmed with shadows. Yet the pregnancies continued. Year after year, another son, another identical face. The midwives, once steady in their work, now approached the farmhouse with dread. They exchanged fearful glances over Anna's labored cries, whispering prayers under their breath. Some claimed Anna begged them to stop, begged them not to let another come. But no one could halt the rhythm of fate. The town began to see her less as a woman and more as a vessel, a figure trapped in a cycle she could not escape. They pitied her, yes, but they also feared her. For if she was cursed, then her suffering was not hers alone. It was a warning. Children asked their mothers, "Why does she only have sons?" And the mothers, unable to answer, simply told them not to ask again. Anna withdrew further into herself. Days passed when she did not leave the house at all. When she did, she wore her veil low, her steps slow, her head bowed. It was as though she carried not only her sons, but the weight of the town's eyes pressing down on her shoulders. And yet, in her silence, one truth became clear. If the father's silence was suspicion, the mother's silence was grief. For every identical son that entered the world, a part of Anna seemed to fade. And soon, the town wondered not if another boy would be born, but whether Anna herself would survive the burden. By the time the 10th son was born, the Jensen's farmhouse no longer seemed large enough to contain them. The identical boys moved like shadows across the fields, their pale hair catching the light, their blue eyes reflecting the sky. To see them together was unsettling. To count them was worse. For sometimes, the numbers did not add up. It began with whispers. A farmer passing by the Jensen land swore he saw only 8 boys playing, though there should have been 9. Another villager claimed he saw 5 at the riverbank one evening, but only 4 returned home. At first, people blamed confusion. Who could tell them apart? Perhaps one lingered in the trees, perhaps another slipped quietly ahead. But then came the nights when candles burned late in the farmhouse, and his cries muffled through the shuttered windows. The sound was not of childbirth this time. It was of loss. The first disappearance was never spoken of openly. The town only noticed when one less boy came to church. The priest's records still listed 10, but 9 sat in the pew. No funeral, no grave, only silence. A neighbor, braver than most, asked Henrik where the missing child had gone. Henrik's jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed. "He is gone," was all he said. Nothing more. Gone. The word chilled the village. Months later, another vanished. One day there were 9. The next 8. The boys never spoke of it. They continued to move together, to play in unison, their laughter filling the air. But to the townsfolk, that laughter now sounded hollow. Some believed the boys had drowned in the river. their identical faces swallowed by the current. Others whispered darker tales, that Henrik himself had taken them, unable to bear the endless repetition. Still others believed the curse was claiming its price, erasing the children one by one. The farmhouse grew more silent with each loss. Anna's veil hung lower. Her eyes seemed empty, as if part of her soul had vanished with the missing boys. She stopped going to the market. She stopped speaking in church. Her body moved, but her spirit seemed already gone. Henrik grew colder too. His silence, once heavy, now felt like stone. The townspeople stopped asking questions. They feared the answers. The disappearances became part of the mystery. Some claimed they saw boys wandering at night, barefoot in the fields, their pale faces turned toward the moon. Others swore they glimpsed them in the fog near the river, only to vanish when approached. Were these the missing sons? Or simply the minds of frightened villagers, haunted by fear and superstition? No one could say. But one thing was certain. The Jensen family was shrinking. And with every disappearance, the legend of the Holstebro boys grew darker. Because in Holstebro, people no longer asked why the boys looked the same. They asked how many would be left when the curse finally ended. By the late 1870s, the story of the Jensen family had already taken root in legend. Holstebro itself had changed. New farms, new faces, the steady creep of modernity, but the memory of the identical boys lingered like a ghost in the fog. No one knew how many survived. Some said only a handful reached adulthood, their faces so alike that even as grown men, they could not be told apart. Others whispered that all had vanished, swallowed by the same mystery that had brought them into the world. But whether they lived or died, the legacy remained. Travelers still came, curious scholars and wandering priests, hoping to find proof. They left with stories, not answers. Villagers told them of the farmhouse where candlelight burned long after midnight, of Anna's hollow face, her body broken by endless births, of Henrik's silence, heavy with guilt. The story spread beyond Denmark. In Copenhagen, in Berlin, even as far as London, newspapers carried strange little articles about the Holstebro boys. Most dismissed it as rumor, but some readers shuddered, because whether true or not, the tale felt too haunting to ignore. In Holstebro, the children grew up hearing it as a warning. Parents told them not to wander near the old Jensen farm. Some swore the land itself was cursed, that crops would fail if sown too near. Others claimed they could still hear laughter in the fog, the sound of identical voices calling across the fields. The farmhouse eventually fell into ruin. Its walls crumbled, its roof sagged, weeds rising through the floor. But locals avoided it, unwilling to step inside. It does not belong to us, they said. It belongs to them. Even today, whispers linger. Historians argue whether the case was one of rare genetics or exaggerated superstition. Some suggest the boys were simply close in appearance, their stories stretched by fearful villagers. But those who grew up in Holstebro shake their heads. No, they insist. You did not see them. You did not stand in the church and watch 10 identical faces stare back at you. The legacy of the Holstebro case is not just about a family. It is about fear. Fear of what cannot be explained. Fear of patterns that defy reason. Fear of seeing the same face repeated again and again until you no longer know which is real. The Jensens faded, but their story did not. And in the mists of western Denmark, when the fog rolls thick and the river runs black, some still swear they see pale figures in the fields. Identical boys, frozen in time, watching, because some mysteries never die. They only wait.